Have you ever felt a pull towards someone you knew was wrong for you? A magnetic, almost fated attraction that defied all logic. Have you ever been haunted by a sexual fantasy that filled you with a confusing mixture of arousal and deep, unsettling shame? Have you ever felt a profound emotional numbness, a sense of being disconnected from your own body, your own desires? What if these experiences are not signs of a moral failing or a broken psyche? What if they are messages? Garbled, cryptic, and often terrifying messages from the deepest, most hidden part of yourself. This is the realm of the sexual shadow, and its greatest cartographer was the Swiss psychiatrist, Carl Gustav Jung. While the world often associates the psychology of sex with Freud, it was Jung who ventured into the even darker, more mystical territory of the soul's relationship with desire. He didn't just see a biological urge. He saw a spiritual force, a raw, undifferentiated energy he called libido. An energy that, when repressed, doesn't simply disappear. It festers. It mutates. It projects. Today, we journey into that shadowland. We will explore Carl Jung's unspoken theory of desire, a theory woven through his concepts of the shadow, the anima, individuation, and the alchemical process of making the unconscious conscious. This is not a comfortable journey. It requires radical honesty. But for those who dare to take it, the destination is nothing less than wholeness. To understand the sexual shadow, we must first descend into the architecture of the human soul as mapped by Carl Jung. Imagine that the self you present to the world, your colleagues, your family, even the face you see in the mirror is the brightly lit, beautifully decorated main floor of a house. This is what Jung called the persona. It is your social mask, the curated collection of acceptable traits, manners, and beliefs that allow you to navigate society. It is the good student, the responsible parent, the ambitious professional. It is necessary, it is functional, but it is not the whole of who you are. It is only one floor of the house. Beneath this main floor lies a cellar, dark and often unvisited. This is the realm of the shadow. Here, in the unconscious, we store everything that does not fit with the pristine image of our persona. The shadow is the repository for everything we deny in ourselves, everything we find unacceptable, and everything we have failed to develop. It is the twin, the dark brother or sister, that walks behind us our entire lives. It is crucial to understand that the shadow is not inherently evil. It is the raw, untamed parts of our potential. It might contain our buried creativity, our healthy aggression, our capacity for righteous anger, our childlike spontaneity. But because these traits were inconvenient, unwelcome, or shamed by our environment, we learned to disown them. We packed them into a bag and threw it over our shoulder, pretending it wasn't there, even as it grew heavier with each passing year. We relegated them to the cellar of the psyche now. We must ask the crucial question of all the human experiences we could possibly repress. What do we as a society and as individuals lock away more fiercely, more consistently, and with more shame than our sexuality? More than any other aspect of our being, sexuality becomes the primary inhabitant of this psychic cellar. Why? The reasons are as deep as our history and as intimate as our childhood. First, there is the fundamental conflict between primal instinct and social order. Our sexual drive, the raw biological imperative for connection and procreation, is a wild and chaotic force of nature. It is the untamed god Pan, laughing in the forest. Civilization, conversely, is built upon rules, structure, and the deferral of gratification. To build cities, economies, and stable families, this raw libidinal energy must be channeled and controlled. Society, therefore, creates narrow, acceptable pipelines for this force-like marriage or monogamous relationships, while labeling all other expressions of it as deviant, dangerous, or sinful. The vast, roaring river of human desire is dammed up, allowed to trickle through only a few approved channels. The rest of the water pools in the darkness, forming the vast reservoir of the sexual shadow. Second, this societal structuring is powerfully reinforced by centuries of religious and moral conditioning. Many traditions created a stark dualism between the pure, divine spirit and the corrupt, sinful flesh. The body and its desires were framed as a trap, a source of temptation that chained the soul to the material world. This created a catastrophic split within the Western psyche. Our instinctual nature, which includes our sexuality, was not seen as a sacred part of our wholeness, but as an enemy to be conquered, a beast to be caged. This ancient war against the body is reenacted within the soul of every individual who inherits this cultural legacy. We learn to see our own desires not as a source of vitality and connection, but as a source of profound existential shame. This process of repression begins in the earliest moments of our lives. A child's initial exploration of their own body is an act of pure, innocent curiosity. There is no shame, no narrative attached. But this innocence is fragile. It is shattered by the parent's reaction. A sharp no, a look of disgust, an anxious silence. In that moment, a powerful lesson is learned. This part of me is bad. This feeling is dirty. This must be hidden. The vibrant natural impulse is severed from consciousness and pushed down into the dark. Each subsequent shaming experience, a playground taunt, a rigid school lesson, a terrifying sermon, adds another layer of psychic concrete to the cellar door. The conscious ego, the part of us that wants to be good and loved, collaborates in this process. The ego values control, order, and predictability. Sexuality is the opposite. It is messy, vulnerable, and requires a surrender of control. In the throes of passion, the carefully constructed persona dissolves. We are reduced to our most instinctual animal selves. This loss of control is terrifying to the ego, which would rather keep this chaotic force safely locked away, where it can be managed, or so it thinks. But here's the central, terrifying truth of Jungian psychology. What we repress does not die. It doesn't even weaken. It gains autonomous power. The disowned sexual energy congeals around the initial wounds of shame and forms what Jung called a complex. It becomes a splinter personality, a ghost in our own machine, with its own agenda and its own will. The more we consciously deny its existence, the more desperately it seeks expression. The louder we insist, "I am not that kind of person," the more furiously it bangs on the cellar door. This is why the good person suddenly has a scandalous affair. It's why the devout priest is haunted by perverse obsessions. It's why a person who feels numb and passionless is secretly addicted to extreme pornography. These are not failures of willpower. They are the inevitable eruptions of the autonomous sexual shadow, bursting forth in distorted, desperate, and often destructive ways to demand the attention of the conscious mind. It is a cry for integration, disguised as a symptom. And until we find the courage to turn, to take the key, and to walk down into that cellar, to face what we have hidden, we will remain a house divided against itself, forever haunted by the ghost of our own disowned vitality. The creation of a dense sexual shadow is rarely a gentle, passive process of simple neglect. More often, the cellar door is not just locked. It is blasted shut and barricaded. The shadow is not merely forgotten. It is actively and violently exiled. For many, the sexual shadow is forged in the fires of trauma and its insidious counterpart, erotic shame. These formative wounds come in many forms. There are the overt, catastrophic events, the big T traumas, such as sexual abuse or assault. In these shattering moments, the psyche is overwhelmed by a terror it cannot possibly process. The body ceases to be a home and becomes a scene of a crime. Instinct, which should be a source of wisdom and pleasure, becomes inextricably linked with violation, powerlessness, and pain. In the face of such an unbearable reality, the psyche performs a desperate act of self-preservation. It splits. It severs the connection between the conscious mind and the body's instinctual life in a profound act of dissociation. The conscious self floats away, becoming a detached observer, leaving the body to endure the unthinkable. This is the ultimate act of psychic quarantine, exiling the entire territory of physical sensation to protect the core of the self from annihilation. But trauma is not always a singular explosive event. It can be a slow, cumulative poison, death by 1,000 cuts delivered through the little T traumas of a childhood steeped in shame. It is the parent who reacts to their child's self-exploration with a look of cold disgust. It is the religious sermon that paints desire as the devil's whisper. It is the relentless cultural messaging that idealizes an impossible purity while sexualizing everything. It is the violation of emotional boundaries, where a child's inner world is not respected, teaching them that their feelings, and by extension, their desires, are not their own. These smaller wounds repeated over years weave a narrative deep into the soul. My nature is flawed. My body is a source of shame. My desire is dangerous. This is erotic shame. It's a profound sense of being fundamentally wrong in one's most instinctual self. It is not the guilt of having done something wrong, but the shame of being something wrong. When sexuality is paired with this deep trauma and shame, the natural flow of libido, that great river of life energy, is violently dammed up. The psyche, in its attempt to protect itself from further pain, declares the entire domain of sexuality a hazardous zone. This is the very essence of sexual repression. It is a survival strategy. The ego decides it is better to feel nothing at all than to risk feeling the terror and shame again. The result of this severance is a profound and tragic split in the personality. The individual begins to live almost entirely from the neck up, an intellectual consciousness piloting a body it no longer trusts or inhabits. They might consciously identify as having a low libido or being asexual. It's not from a place of natural inclination, but from a place of psychic amputation. They often experience a pervasive emotional numbness, a gray blanket that smothers not just pain, but all vibrant feelings. The world becomes a two-dimensional, colorless place. Why does this happen? Because libido, the Jungian life force, is a single, unified current. You cannot dam the river in the valley of sexuality without causing the waters in the valleys of creativity, joy, and spiritual connection to stagnate and freeze over. In the effort to shut down the dangerous energy of desire, one inadvertently shuts down the very source of vitality itself. Life becomes a matter of endurance rather than experience. Yet, energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed or displaced. The dammed-up river of libido still exerts immense pressure. This pressure must find an outlet. And so, the emotional numbness is often punctuated by sudden, inexplicable intrusions from the shadow. These are psychic earthquakes. A sudden, consuming obsession with pornography becomes the only way for the psyche to feel a jolt of anything. A desperate attempt to break through the ice of numbness. A person in a stable, loving relationship might suddenly detonate their life with a reckless affair, driven by a force they cannot name, which is simply the repressed shadow demanding to live. Often, this repressed energy manifests as a fetish. From a Jungian perspective, a fetish is a fascinating psychological workaround. The full, undiluted power of the erotic instinct is too vast and terrifying for the wounded ego to confront directly. So the psyche performs a kind of symbolic condensation. It pours that entire ocean of repressed energy into a single, manageable container, a specific object, a particular material, a ritualized act. The fetish becomes a highly charged, sacred symbol, the only conduit through which the immense pressure of the shadow can be safely released. It feels both alien and intensely personal because it is a distorted fragment of a disowned whole. This creates a torturous, self-perpetuating cycle of shame. First, there's the shame of the original wound. This shame leads to repression. The repression leads to a distorted, compulsive eruption of the shadow. The individual then feels a new, searing shame for the compulsion, for the addiction, the affair, the fetish. This secondary shame powerfully reinforces the original belief, you see. My sexuality is bad. It is destructive. This confirmation drives the person to repress even harder, which in turn builds more pressure, guaranteeing a more violent eruption in the future. It is a toxic feedback loop, a prison of shame, built brick by brick with each turn of the cycle. To begin healing is to stop blaming the symptom and to start asking, with courage and compassion, what the original wound was, and what the repressed energy is trying so desperately to express. The exiled energy of the sexual shadow does not remain dormant in the cellar of the psyche. It is a dynamic, living force that constantly seeks reunification with the conscious mind. So, how does this hidden part of us reach out? How does it influence our meticulously ordered lives? One of its most powerful and bewildering mechanisms is a psychological process Jung called projection. Projection is an unconscious defense mechanism, a way the ego protects itself from confronting what it has disowned. Think of the psyche as a film projector. The bright, sharp film loaded inside is the repressed content of your shadow, your secret desires, your disowned aggression, your buried creativity, your raw sensuality. You, the operator, are unaware of what film is even playing. You then encounter another person, and your unconscious projector switches on, casting that hidden inner movie onto them. They become the blank screen, and you do not see the screen. You see only your own projected film, believing it to be the absolute reality of who that other person is. This is the secret engine of unconscious attraction. This is why we can meet 100 polite, suitable, and logical partners and feel nothing, only to be utterly captivated by one person who throws our entire world off its axis. This attraction is often irrational, magnetic, and feels almost fated. It bypasses the ego's carefully curated checklist of what we think we want in a partner. It's a deeper, more primal recognition. The unconscious has spotted a perfect screen for its projections. That person you are inexplicably drawn to. The one who embodies a dangerous freedom, a smoldering sensuality, or a dark intensity that both terrifies and excites you. You are likely falling in love not with the person themselves, but with a living, breathing projection of your own shadow. They possess a hook, some quality that allows your projection to stick. They carry the very traits you have denied in yourself. The quiet, respectable accountant finds himself obsessed with a chaotic, free-spirited artist. The perpetual nice girl is drawn to a man with immovable, even selfish boundaries. In these powerful attractions, the unconscious, in its infinite wisdom, is trying to engineer a reunion. It orchestrates these intense entanglements to force you to confront the missing pieces of your own soul. For men, this dynamic is intimately and profoundly tied to one of Jung's most brilliant concepts, the archetype of the anima. The anima is the unconscious inner feminine of a man's personality. She is not a personal trait, but an archetypal psychic structure. Formed by his primal experience of the feminine most, notably his mother, but also imbued with the collective. Inherited images of woman passed down through millennia. The nurturing earth mother, the seductive siren, the wise priestess, the terrifying witch. The anima is the gatekeeper to the depths of his unconscious. She holds his capacity for relationship, his emotional life, his connection to nature, his creativity, and his very soul. In a man who has been conditioned to be stoic, logical, and disconnected from his feelings, common predicament in modern culture, his emotional and relational capacities are relegated to the shadow. His anima thus remains unconscious, undeveloped, and undifferentiated. Because he cannot access these qualities within himself, he is compelled to find them outside of himself. He relentlessly and unconsciously projects his anima onto the women he meets. He searches for a woman to be his soul carrier, to manage his emotional life for him, to be the living embodiment of the feminine he has disowned. According to Jungian psychology, the anima develops in 4 distinct stages. When a man is stuck at an early stage, his relationships suffer. The first stage is Eve, representing the purely instinctual and biological. Here, a woman is seen primarily as an object of physical desire and a bearer of children, a connection based on raw instinct. The second stage is Helen of Troy, where the woman is an aesthetic and romantic object, alluring and sexually desirable, but still a vessel for a man's fantasies, lacking true individuality. Many romantic infatuations never move beyond this stage. The third stage is Mary, who elevates love to a spiritual plane. She is the virtuous mother, the source of comfort and guidance. Finally, the fourth and most developed stage is Sophia, Greek for wisdom. Here the anima is no longer a projection but an integrated inner guide, mediating between the conscious ego and the wise depths of the unconscious. A man who has integrated his Sophia can relate to a woman in her full human reality, seeing her as a partner in a shared journey toward wholeness. When a man's anima is unintegrated, the projection is total. In the initial stages of a relationship, this feels like divine magic. It is the overwhelming enchantment of love at first sight, the feeling of having found one's other half. He feels a sense of profound completeness because he is, for the first time, in the presence of his own projected soul. But this is a dangerous and intoxicating illusion. He is not in a relationship with a real, flawed, complex human being. He is in a mystical relationship with his own inner feminine, cast upon an external screen. Inevitably, the real woman will fail to live up to this impossible, divine role. She will have her own needs, her own opinions, her own shadow. When she asserts her individuality, when she is tired or angry or simply human, the pristine projection shatters. The man then reacts not with understanding, but with a sense of profound personal betrayal. He may erupt in rage, accusing her of deceiving him. He may fall into a moody, bitter disappointment, or a cold, punishing withdrawal. He feels as though his goddess has turned into a monster, never realizing he was the one who placed her on the pedestal. He then rips his projection back and begins the hunt for a new, perfect screen, repeating the cycle, forever chasing his own soul, but never daring to cultivate it within. The great journey of psychological maturation, the process of individuation, requires a man to undertake the painful but liberating task of withdrawing these projections. It means turning inward. It is the work of building a conscious relationship with his own inner anima. It means asking, what feeling am I expecting her to carry for me? What creative impulse am I hoping she will ignite in me? It is the process of developing his own capacity for feeling, for relating, for nurturing. Only then, when he is no longer unconsciously demanding that a woman be his soul, can he see and love a real woman for who she truly is. Only then is a relationship between two whole individuals, not two fragmented halves, possible. The repressed energies of the sexual shadow do not communicate in the clear, logical prose of our conscious ego. The abyss of the unconscious has its own native tongue, and it is a language of symbol, myth, and image. It speaks to us in the cryptic narratives of our nighttime dreams, in the sudden hijackings of our moods, and most potently in the vivid, often unsettling theater of our sexual fantasies, particularly those fantasies that provoke a hot blush of shame are not. From a Jungian perspective, random, hedonistic firings of a primitive brain. They are not merely suggestions for physical acts. They are highly symbolic, deeply personal communications from the most disowned parts of ourselves. Like a dream, a sexual fantasy is a story the unconscious is telling the conscious mind about what it lacks, what it craves, and what it needs for wholeness. To decipher this language, we must first understand a core principle of the psyche that Jung called enantiodromia, the tendency of all things to eventually turn into their opposite. The psyche is a self-regulating system that constantly seeks balance. When our conscious life, our persona, becomes to one-sided, the unconscious will compensate by generating an intense energy of the opposite quality. And this energy most often appears in technicolor detail. Within our fantasies, consider the prim and proper executive, whose life is a monument to control, order, and respectable achievement. She might be haunted by fantasies of complete and total surrender, of debasement, of being powerless. The shame she feels is immense because the fantasy seems to negate everything she consciously stands for. A literal interpretation would be terrifying, but a symbolic one is liberating. The fantasy is not a literal wish to be harmed. It is the soul's desperate scream for balance. It is a cry to be released from the crushing psychic burden of constant control. It is a deep, unconscious longing to trust, to let go, to be vulnerable, to experience the ecstasy of relinquishing the ever-watchful ego. Consider the perpetually nice guy, the people-pleaser who has repressed every ounce of his own healthy aggression to be accommodating and conflict-averse. He may find himself disturbed by intensely dominant, even aggressive, sexual fantasies. Again, the shame can be crippling. But the fantasy is not the sign of a budding tyrant. It is the re-emergence of his disowned inner warrior. It is the psyche's plea for him to integrate a healthy sense of power, to establish boundaries, to learn to say no, and to claim his own space in the world. The sexualized aggression in the fantasy is simply the carrier wave for a vital psychic quality that has been locked in the cellar. For far too long in this light, shame becomes an invaluable diagnostic tool. It is no longer an emotion to be run from, but a compass pointing directly to our most vital work. The intensity of the shame you feel about a fantasy is a direct measure of the distance between your conscious ego and that. It's a particular disowned part of your shadow. The greater the shame, the more urgent the need for integration. The work of the soul is to walk toward the shame, not away from it. This leads to a crucial distinction. Jungian psychology does not advocate for the literal acting out of these fantasies. To do so is to remain unconscious. It is to be driven by the raw complex, which often leads to destructive behavior and reinforces the shame cycle. The true alchemical work is to hold the fantasy in the vessel of consciousness. You must resist the dual temptations to either compulsively act it out or defensively repress it. Instead, you engage with it. You ask the question, what is the symbolic meaning here? What archetypal energy is trying to emerge? What part of me have I disowned that is now appearing in this symbolic costume? This is the beginning of true shadow work on desire. It is the process of metabolizing the raw data of the unconscious into conscious wisdom. And what of lust? In our puritanical inheritance, lust is seen as a base, animalistic sin, dirty, mindless urge to be vanquished. From a Jungian perspective, this view is dangerously naive. Lust is simply the raw, archetypal energy of the life force itself, unrefined by consciousness. It is pure, undifferentiated libido. It is the god Pan, the horned, cloven-hoofed deity of the wilds, representing our untamed, amoral, instinctual nature. Pan is the energy of life at its most primal. He is terrifying to the civilized ego. But he is also the source of ecstatic vitality and a profound connection to our own earthy nature. When you feel a surge of pure, objectifying lust, you are experiencing a momentary possession by this archetypal force. It is the shadow breaking through. To attempt to kill this god within you is to risk becoming psychically sterile, anemic, and disconnected from the very source of your life. You become the gray, lifeless ego, cut off from the vibrant, chaotic wisdom of the body. The great psychological task, then, is not to destroy lust, but to integrate and humanize it. The challenge is to build a bridge between the raw fire of Pan and the relating empathetic qualities of the human heart. This is the sacred work of transforming lust into eros. Lust, when it remains in the shadow, is cold, compulsive, and impersonal. It sees only parts, not wholes. It seeks only the release of tension, a frantic discharge of energy. Eros, on the other hand, is integrated passion. It is the fire of lust brought into conscious relationship. Eros seeks connection, not just release. It sees and desires the whole person, their soul, their mind, their flaws, their light. When lust is integrated, it becomes passion, the engine of life, the creative fire that fuels not just profound sexual intimacy, but all art, all ambition, all daring pursuits. The goal is not to extinguish the wildfire of instinct, but to build a proper hearth for it within the center of our being, transforming its destructive potential into a life-giving, soul-warming flame. Of course. Here is part 5. The modern alchemist Semen retention and the psychology of libido expanded to approximately 1,100 words. This version provides a deeper, more nuanced Jungian analysis of the practice, its potential, and its psychological dangers. Part 5. The modern alchemist, Semen retention, and the psychology of libido. The music takes on a more modern, focused, and slightly intense quality. Visuals could include alchemical diagrams, mandalas, an imagery of controlled fire or contained energy. Narrator. in our modern digital landscape. A fascinating and often controversial practice has emerged from the depths of online men's communities. Speaking directly to this ancient challenge of managing the libidinal fire, semen retention. Often linked with movements like nofap, the practice involves a conscious discipline of abstaining from ejaculation. Proponents claim it conserves a vital life force, redirecting this potent energy towards increased mental clarity, physical vitality, personal magnetism, and spiritual insight. While it may seem like a new internet phenomenon, this practice is a modern iteration of ascetic and esoteric traditions that have existed for millennia. From the brahmacharya of yogic philosophy to the practices of Taoist masters, from a purely Jungian perspective, semen retention can be understood as a powerful, albeit perilous, form of modern-day alchemy. It is an attempt to transform the lead of raw, instinctual drive into the gold of conscious, creative energy. The core alchemical idea is the transmutation of the prima materia, the base, chaotic raw material. In this psychological alchemy, the prima materia is libido itself, the raw sexual energy of the god Pan. The practitioner's body and psyche become the athanor, the sealed alchemical vessel in which the great work is to be performed. By retaining the physical essence, he symbolically creates a contained system, preventing the psychic energy from being unconsciously, compulsively discharged. This act of containment generates immense psychological heat and pressure. The discipline required is the fire that begins the alchemical process. The man is forced, perhaps for the first time, to truly sit with the unadulterated fire of his own desire. Without the easy, habitual release valve of ejaculation, he must confront the raw energy he typically discharges without a thought. He must face the anxiety, the restlessness, and the sheer power of the instinctual drive. This is the first crucial step, making the unconscious energy conscious. In its most ideal form, this practice aligns perfectly with the Jungian concept of redirecting libido. Jung argued that the same psychic energy that fuels sexuality also fuels all other aspects of creative life. When consciously contained and directed, this energy can be sublimated, raised up, and transformed. The pressure in the vessel can fuel intense focus, drive artistic creation, deepen spiritual practice, and build a profound sense of inner solidity and self-possession. It can be a powerful pattern interrupt for the compulsive, shadow-driven behaviors of pornography addiction, forcing a man to confront the emptiness or anxiety that the compulsion was medicating. In this light, semen retention can be a courageous act of self-mastery, a genuine attempt at individuation. However, the shadow of this practice is immense and subtle. For every aspiring alchemist, there is the grave danger of becoming a deluded prison warden. The line between conscious transformation and fear-based repression is razor-thin, and it is here that the practice becomes psychologically perilous. A man might undertake this discipline not from a place of courageous self-exploration, but from a deep-seated fear of his own sexuality. This fear is often a fear of the anima, the inner feminine. Authentic sexual connection requires vulnerability, emotional expression, and a messy, ecstatic surrender of ego control, all qualities of the anima, for a man with a fragile ego, or one wounded by a negative relationship with the feminine. This surrender feels like a terrifying death. It feels like being weakened, consumed, or devoured. For him, semen retention becomes a defense mechanism. It is not about transforming energy, but about hoarding it. It becomes a fortress of hypermasculine control, built to keep the terrifying, chaotic, and beautiful influence of the feminine at bay. In this negative manifestation, the practice does not lead to integration, but to a sterile fortification and inflation of the ego. The man becomes proud of his control, his discipline. He develops a spiritual ego, looking down with contempt on those who succumb to their base desires. He mistakes his rigid control for genuine mastery. He feels powerful, but it is the brittle power of a dam holding back a flood, not the flexible power of a river skillfully navigated. He is not free. He has simply built himself a stronger, more gilded prison. The cellar door of the shadow is not just locked, it is bolted and barricaded. but the banging from within becomes a deafening, constant psychic pressure. This repressed energy, denied a healthy relational outlet, will inevitably erupt. It may seep out as chronic irritability, arrogance, and misogynistic attitudes, where he blames external women for the inner turmoil his own anima is causing. Or it may lead to a catastrophic relapse, a complete shattering of his discipline in a binge of the very behavior he sought to transcend. This failure then reinforces his deepest shame, proving to him that his sexuality is indeed a monstrous, uncontrollable force, sending him back to his fortress with even greater fear and rigidity. The difference between alchemy and repression lies entirely in intention and awareness. The practice itself is a neutral tool. The vital question is why. Is the goal to kill desire or to understand it? Is the motivation a fear of the feminine or a desire to build the inner capacity to meet her from a place of wholeness? Does the practice lead to more compassion, creativity, and connection, or to more judgment, rigidity, and isolation? True alchemical transformation of libido requires engaging with the contained energy, not just bottling it up. It requires creative outlets, meaningful work, conscious relationship, and a direct confrontation with the very shadow one is trying to integrate. Without this conscious, creative, and relational engagement, semen retention can easily become a path not to individuation, but to an arid, inflated, and deeply lonely state of being. So, after this long descent into the cellar of the psyche, after confronting the wounds of trauma, the illusions of projection, and the raw power of lust and fantasy, we arrive at the ultimate question. What is the goal? What is the purpose of this difficult, often painful exploration of the sexual shadow? The answer is the radical and beautiful heart of Carl Jung's entire psychology. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, for that is impossible and would leave us tragically incomplete. The goal is not to perfect the self into a flawless, sterile saint, free from all darkness. Nor is it to capitulate to the shadow's every primitive impulse, which leads only to chaos and destruction. The singular, lifelong goal is integration. This is the process Jung called individuation. It is the journey of becoming indivisible, no longer split against oneself. It is the process of becoming a psychologically whole, individual being, fulfilling the unique potential that was encoded in you from the beginning. And this heroic journey cannot be completed by bypassing the darkness. The integration of the shadow, and particularly the potent and energy-rich sexual shadow, is not an optional side quest. It is the central, non-negotiable task. For in that cellar, we have not only locked away our monsters, but we have also locked away the raws, most vibrant and potent treasures of our own life force. Shadow work on desire is the courageous act of turning around to face the very thing you have been running from your entire life. It is the conscious decision to stop allowing the monster to chase you from behind and to instead meet it face to face. It is the practice of sitting in quiet contemplation with your most shameful fantasies, treating them not as commands to be acted upon, but as sacred texts from your own soul. Asking them, what wisdom do you hold for me? What part of myself have you come to represent? It is feeling the raw, magnetic energy of your attractions and, instead of blindly following them, having the courage to trace them back to their source within your own disowned self. It is the moment of profound and humbling admission. This, too, is me. This lust, this rage, this vulnerability, this wildness, this supposed perversion. It is not an alien invader. It is a lost and exiled citizen of my own inner kingdom. True integration begins with this radical act of self-acceptance. This process brings with it a profound ethical responsibility. To integrate your inner aggression does not give you license to become a bully. It gives you the capacity for healthy assertiveness, which must be guided by conscious values and empathy. To integrate your lust does not mean indulging every impulse. It means learning to hold that sacred fire within the container of a conscious, loving, and respectful relationship. Consciousness must become the benevolent ruler of the kingdom, a ruler who listens to and respects all its subjects, even the dark and unruly ones, but who ultimately makes the final ethical choice? Jung saw this ultimate integration as an alchemical process, which he called the coniunctio, or the sacred marriage. It is the symbolic inner union of the great opposites of the psyche. It is the marriage of the conscious ego with the unconscious shadow. It is the union of the masculine principle, logos logic, order, and discrimination with the feminine principle, eros relatedness, connection, and feeling. It is the reconciliation of spirit and instinct, of heaven and earth, right within the vessel of a single human soul. The product of this sacred inner marriage is the integrated self, symbolized in alchemy by the androgen or the rabasa figure of divine wholeness. No longer at war with itself, when we dare to undertake this work, when we allow the light of consciousness to penetrate the darkness of the sexual shadow, something extraordinary begins to happen. The compulsive, addictive, and destructive nature of the repressed energy begins to fade. Why? Because the energy no longer needs to scream for attention through symptoms. It is being seen, heard, and honored. The toxic shame that has poisoned our lives dissolves in the light of compassionate awareness. The unconscious, faded attractions that led to so much pain are gradually replaced by conscious, deliberate choices in love, the pervasive emotional numbness. That gray prison of the repressed gives way to a vibrant, feeling connection to our own bodies and to the world. We begin to feel alive again. The body is no longer a dangerous animal to be controlled or a machine to be optimized, but a wise and trusted companion, a source of pleasure, wisdom, and grounding. We no longer need to unconsciously project our soul onto others, demanding that they complete us, because we are finally learning to find and cultivate that wholeness within ourselves. Our sexuality, for so long a source of shame, fear, or compulsion, is finally reclaimed. It ceases to be a disconnected, it's an instinctual drive and becomes what it was always meant to be, a deeply integrated expression of our creative life force. It becomes a source of genuine pleasure, profound intimacy, even spiritual connection, a true union with another whole person. This is the great, unspoken promise of Jung's theory of desire. The path into the darkness, the descent into the cellar of the psyche, does not lead to ruin, as our fears would have us believe. It leads home. Home to a self that is not perfect, not pure, not without its darkness, but is finally and magnificently whole. It is the discovery that the treasure you have been seeking your entire life in the arms of others, in the pursuit of success, in the flight from your own darkness, was buried in the very place you were most terrified to look, within yourself. Our journey through the complex, often treacherous landscape of the sexual shadow ends here. Not with a simple map, but with a compass. The desires that haunt you, the fantasies that shame you, and the attractions that mystify you are not signs of a broken psyche. They are a symbolic language, the desperate, coded messages from the exiled parts of your own soul, crying out for recognition. The path to healing is not found in a puritanical war against your instincts, nor in a hedonistic surrender to them. Both paths leave you fragmented and unfree. The true path, the alchemical path of individuation, lies in the courageous work of integration. It is the willingness to descend into your own darkness, not to be consumed by it, but to reclaim the treasure of vitality you left there long ago. This is the great, unspoken promise of Jung's theory of desire, to forge a sacred marriage between your light and your dark, your consciousness and your instinct, your spirit and your flesh. The journey through the cellar of the psyche does not lead to ruin. It leads home, not to a self that is perfect, but to a self that is finally and magnificently whole. And in that wholeness, we find not a life free from shadow, but one brilliantly and courageously alive.